On the morning of the third day at Thermopylae, a Spartan warrior ate breakfast. He knew he was going to die that day. The scouts had confirmed it before dawn. The Persians had found the mountain path. The flanking force was already moving. The pass that his phalanx had held for 2 days against a force that outnumbered them by the tens of thousands was about to become a trap with no exit. He ate anyway, calmly. He combed his long hair, a Spartan ritual before battle, adjusted his helmet, checked the grip of his shield. Around him, the remaining Spartans did the same. With the sunrise of the third day, Leonidas watched his faithful Spartan bodyguards eat their morning meal and comb their hair. "Have a good breakfast, men," he told them, "for we dine in Hades." What strikes most people about this moment, what has struck people for 2,500 years, is not the courage. Courage under pressure is something soldiers across history have demonstrated. What strikes people is the calm, the complete absence of panic, the ritual composure of men who have been trained since childhood for exactly this. Not to win, necessarily, but to hold, to not break, to make the cost of breaking them so catastrophic that the enemy remembers it longer than the victory. This video is not about the myth of the 300. It's about the reality of the men who stood in that pass, what their bodies had been trained to endure, what they wore and carried and ate, how they fought in rotating shifts for 3 days against one of history's most powerful armies, and why, and when given the clear opportunity to leave, they stayed. Subscribe, hit the bell, drop a like, and let's walk into the hot gates together. The man who stood at Thermopylae did not become what he was in months of military training. He became what he was over more than 2 decades of a system that is, by any modern standard, one of the most extreme human development programs ever deliberately designed. The agoge, Sparta's educational and military training system, began when a Spartan boy was approximately 7 years old. Not metaphorically. At 7, boys were taken from their families and entered a collective system of barracks life, physical hardening, and incremental exposure to difficulty that would continue without interruption until they were 30 years old. The Agog used harsh, extreme, and sometimes cruel methods to prepare boys to be Spartan citizens and soldiers. Other Greek city-states had fine armies, explains Kimberly D. Ryder, an associate professor of ancient and medieval history at Stetson University. Sparta was recognized by most as the best. What the Agagi produced was not simply a fit soldier. It produced a specific psychological profile that no other Greek city-state could replicate. The Agagi system was brutal but effective, turning boys into warriors with unmatched discipline and resilience. It wasn't just about fighting. It was a complete lifestyle transformation to prepare soldiers for anything. The training had specific documented components. Boys were deliberately underfed, not enough to permanently damage them, but enough to keep them permanently hungry, which forced them to develop the foraging and self-sufficiency skills they would need in the field. They were given minimal clothing in winter and punished for complaining about cold. Boys entered the Agog at the age of 7, where they lived under awful circumstances. They had limited rations and violent punishments and were forced to battle one another. After 14 years of this brutal training, the hoplites became soldiers and served a 40-year term. By the time a Spartan warrior stood at Thermopylae, he had spent over 2 decades learning a specific truth about himself, that his threshold for pain, exhaustion, cold, hunger, and fear was much higher than he had been born with. The Agog hadn't eliminated discomfort. It had taught the body and mind to function effectively through it. This is the detail that military historians keep returning to when they analyze Thermopylae. The Thermopylae Spartans, led by King Leonidas, achieved legendary status by holding off a massive Persian army with just 300 Spartans and allies in 480 BC. They defended the narrow pass for 3 days, buying time for Greek forces to prepare. 3 days of continuous fighting in full bronze armor in a narrow pass in late August heat against rotating fresh troops. The Agog didn't make that possible through supernatural toughness. It made it possible by systematically raising, over 23 years, the level at which a man's body and mind began to fail. To understand what happened physically at Thermopylae, you need to understand the weight and design of what a Spartan hoplite carried into that pass. Because the equipment is inseparable from the tactics, and the tactics are inseparable from the outcome. A Spartan hoplite at Thermopylae carried the full panoply of Greek heavy infantry armor. The Corinthian helmet, a single piece of hammered bronze that enclosed the entire head, except for a narrow T-shaped opening for the eyes and nose, weighed approximately 2 to 3 kilograms and, in the August heat of the pass, turned the space around the warrior's face into an oven. The breastplate, either a muscle cuirass of bronze or, increasingly by 480 BCE, a layered linen linothorax, covered the torso. Greaves of hammered bronze protected the lower legs. The total weight of armor was between 20 and 30 kilograms. The primary weapon was the doru, a spear approximately 2 to 2.5 meters long, with an iron spearhead at the front and a bronze spike at the rear. The rear spike, called the sauroter, or lizard killer, served two functions. It could be driven into the ground to brace against an infantry charge, and it became the primary weapon if the shaft broke. When spears broke, Spartans drew the scyphos, a short, double-edged iron sword designed for close quarters pushing and stabbing, not dueling. But the defining piece of equipment was the aspes, the hoplite shield, approximately 90 centimeters in diameter, constructed of wood and faced with bronze. It weighed between 6 and 8 kilograms. Its interior was fitted with a distinctive double grip, an armband through which the forearm passed, and a cord at the rim gripped by the hand. This construction meant the shield could not be easily dropped in panic. It was worn, not simply held. The Spartan poet Tertius captures the spirit of Spartan tactics. Standing foot to foot, shield pressed on shield, crest to crest and helmet to helmet, chest to chest engage your man, grasping your sword hilt or long spear. The Spartan military cloak, the tribon, was famously simple. Thin wool, traditionally red, chosen partly because the color concealed bloodstains during battle, and partly because it was the opposite of the elaborate dress that other cultures used to signal status. From their iconic long hair, a symbol among fellow Greeks that they were warriors, to their participation in athletic competitions, meant to showcase strength rather than leisure or entertainment. Every element of a Spartan warrior's physical presentation communicated one thing, and at Thermopylae, that presentation was backed by the most carefully engineered human fighting system the ancient world had produced. A Spartan hoplite at Thermopylae carried between 20 and 30 kilograms of armor and equipment and fought in rotating shifts for 3 consecutive days in August heat. Drop a comment. What do you think was the single hardest physical challenge those men faced? I want to read your answers before we go into how they actually fought. The choice of Thermopylae as the defensive position wasn't symbolic. It was a precise tactical calculation. An understanding that calculation reveals why 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies were able to hold the largest army the ancient world had assembled for 3 full days. The pass of Thermopylae no longer exists in its ancient form. In antiquity, it was a narrow strip of land with the sea on one side and cliffs towering above it on the other. Since then, the shallow sea has silted up, and a mile-wide plain now sits between the cliffs and the water. In 480 BCE, the narrowest point of the pass, the middle gate, where Leonidas chose to make his stand, was approximately 15 to 20 meters wide. Some ancient sources estimate it as narrow as enough for only one cart to pass. This geography was decisive. Eastern tactics relied on the fluid maneuver of the cavalry, the marksmanship of the archer, and the fighting power of the individual. On the open plain, such tactics could pay dividends, but not at Thermopylae, which was tailor-made for hoplite shock tactics. The Persian army, built around mobile cavalry, massed archers, and the weight of numbers, needed space to deploy. A flat plain where cavalry could sweep around flanks, where archers could lay down suppressing fire from 3 directions, where sheer numerical advantage could be translated into encirclement and destruction. That was where Persian tactical genius expressed itself. At the narrow mouth of Thermopylae, none of that was available. There was only a corridor of stone in which the mathematics of numbers meant almost nothing. Unlike the Middle Eastern troops, the Greeks fought as a tight unit. Soldiers served their entire career in platoons of 24, known as sworn bands. Members were not only friends but often lovers as well, and to a Greek, nothing seemed nobler than to die for one's lover. The bravest hoplites fought at the front, their comrades forming 8 or more ranks behind them. Deep ranks buffed staying power, as they prevented those in the combat zone from fleeing. The Spartan tactical innovation at Thermopylae went beyond simply holding position. Ancient sources describe the Greeks, the Spartans in particular, using a deliberate feigned retreat. They would pull back, drawing the Persian troops forward out of formation, then wheel and crash back into the disordered mass. Spartans led the Greek forces, sometimes leaving the safety of the wall to fight fiercely, and then retreat to draw the Persians in and ambush them. The rotation system was perhaps the most sophisticated element. Rather than wearing one unit to exhaustion, different Greek contingents rotated through the front of the fighting while the Spartans managed the transitions. This meant that fresh fighters were always available at the point of maximum effort, a logistical feat that required exactly the kind of unit cohesion and disciplined trust that 23 years of the Agog had built. Day 1. Finally, in mid-August, the Persian army was sighted across the Malian Gulf, approaching Thermopylae. Xerxes had waited 4 days after arriving before attacking, reportedly unable to believe that the Greeks intended to actually fight and expecting them to flee when they understood the scale of what faced them. On August 17, 480 BC, the 5th day of the standoff, Xerxes made his move. He sent the Medes and Scythians for his first attack on the Greek army. They were sent with the order to take the Greeks alive, but King Leonidas resisted the army efficiently, sending many back dead. The Medes, some of the best troops in the Persian Empire, were broken against the wall of shields. Next came the Immortals, the Persian elite guard, their numbers maintained at exactly 10,000. Their reputation for ferocity absolute. They fared no better. Day 2 brought the same result. The Persian attacks continued from dawn to dusk, and the narrow pass continued to compress their advantage into irrelevance. For 2 days, the Greeks defended against Persian attacks and suffered light losses while they imposed heavy casualties on the Persian army. Then came Ephialtes. A local Greek citizen, his name means nightmare in Greek, approached Xerxes with information about a mountain path that bypassed the pass entirely. Only when the Greeks were betrayed did the battle take a detrimental turn for them. Ephialtes informed Xerxes of a path that went around Thermopylae, thus rendering the Greeks' line useless in preventing the Persian army's forward advance. Leonidas, aware that his force was being outflanked, dismissed the bulk of the Greek army and remained to guard their retreat along with 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians. It has been reported that others also remained, including up to 900 Helots and 400 Thebans. On the final day, the Greeks moved forward, out of the narrows into a slightly wider section of the pass. On the 3rd day, the Greeks advanced out of the narrowest part of the pass and fought in a wider area. They were able to inflict very heavy casualties on the Persians attacking from the front, but eventually Leonidas was killed. His men rescued his body and even pushed the Persians back 4 times. The surviving Spartans and Thespians pulled back to the narrowest part of the pass, where they made a last stand at a wall blocking the pass. By now, most had lost their spears and were fighting with daggers, or hands and teeth. When it was over, Greek casualties were estimated at 2,000 dead, as opposed to Persian losses in excess of 20,000. The question that has haunted Thermopylae for 2,500 years is not how they fought. It is why, when given the clear option to retreat, when Leonidas explicitly dismissed the other Greek contingents and gave them the chance to leave, the Spartans stayed. The honest answer requires understanding a value system so different from modern assumptions about self-preservation that it genuinely takes effort to enter. It is commonly stated that the Spartans were obeying the laws of Sparta by not retreating. It has also been proposed that the failure to retreat from Thermopylae gave rise to the notion that Spartans never retreated. But the reality is more complex than simple law following. The Spartan code of honor, the Agage-forged identity that every warrior carried, was built around a specific and total equation. The warrior's value to the community was expressed entirely through his conduct in battle, not in survival. In conduct. Retreat was seen as dishonor. reflecting their commitment to their cause. Their most celebrated moment came at Thermopylae in 480 BC, where just 300 Spartans held off a vastly superior Persian army. This act of bravery not only cemented their legacy, but also inspired the entire Greek world to resist invasion. The Spartan phrase most associated with this moment, the response to Xerxes' demand to surrender their weapons, was Milan Labe. Come and take them. Before invading, Xerxes implored the Spartan king Leonidas to surrender his arms. Leonidas famously replied, "Come and take them." 2 words, no elaboration needed. But the deeper motivation at Thermopylae was strategic as much as it was ethical. Leonidas almost certainly understood that his stand, even in defeat, was buying something irreplaceable. Time for the Greek fleet at Artemisium, time for Athens to evacuate, time for the Greek alliance to cohere around the idea that Persia could be resisted. His death and the deaths of the men who stayed with him was not waste, it was investment. Leonidas was chosen to lead the combined Greek forces determined to resist the Second Persian invasion in 481 BC. This was not simply a tribute to Sparta's military prowess. The coalition wanted Leonidas personally for his capability as a military leader. He was the best strategic mind available to the alliance, and his final decision at Thermopylae, to hold the pass to the end, buying the retreat of 7,000 other Greeks, was the decision of a man who understood exactly what his death was worth. A hero cult of Leonidas survived in Sparta until the 2nd century AD. The Leonidae were celebrated every year in Sparta, with only Spartans allowed to participate, and a bronze statue of Leonidas was erected at Thermopylae in 1955. Under it, a sign reads simply, "Molan Lava." Come and take them. The hot springs at Thermopylae still exist. The pass itself has been transformed by centuries of geological change. The sea has silted up, the narrows are gone. But the place where those men stood, ate their last breakfast, combed their hair, and walked forward knowing what was coming. That place is still there, and what they did there still matters. 3 days, approximately 1,400 men on the final stand. Losses estimated at 20,000 on the Persian side against 2,000 Greek dead. And the Persian invasion, the largest military expedition the ancient world had assembled, continued. Athens was burned, Boeotia was razed, the tactical defeat was total, and yet, the stand at Thermopylae gave Greece the thing it needed more than victory: proof. Proof that the Persian army could be held. Proof that discipline, terrain, and tactics could neutralize numbers. Proof that Xerxes was not invincible. The Greek fleet used that proof at Salamis 2 months later, where the Persian navy was destroyed. The Greek army used it at Plataea the following year, where the Persian land force was broken for good. The Spartans who stayed in the past did not save Greece by dying. They saved Greece by demonstrating, at the cost of their lives, that it was possible to resist. As Herodotus, a Greek historian who lived through the Greco-Persian Wars, wrote, "They are the equal of any men when they fight as individuals. Fighting together as a collective, they surpass all other men." That breakfast on the 3rd morning, the combed hair, the calm. That is what 23 years of the agoge was built to produce. Not men who didn't fear dying, men who didn't let that fear change anything about how they behaved when dying became the only option left. If this video made Thermopylae feel different, less like a legend and more like a real morning, a real breakfast, real men making a real choice, drop a like, share it with someone who loves military history, and click the next video on screen. It was chosen specifically for people who made it all the way to this moment.